So hi guys, thanks for joining us today for this short campusM interview. My name is Ido Peled. I'm the Vice President for Business Development for Mobile Campus Solutions at Libris. And I'm joined with me by the folks from University of Montana. If you'd like to present yourself.
Hi, I'm Seyden. I'm a Student Affairs IT Senior Web Applications Developer. And
I'm Dan Bowling. I'm the Senior Applications Solution Engineer at the University of Montana.
Great, wonderful. And again, thanks for joining. We wanted specifically to talk to you today about the food zoo tile, which you guys created using campusM. But I'll start maybe a little bit before that. If you can just give a quick overview, sort of a background about the mobile project you had at the University of Montana.
Well, so I'd say the background at the University of Montana is that we've always been talking about how we need an app, or more specifically, the administration told us the University of Montana needs an app. And all the IT people on campus were confused about how do we move forward from that? How do we move forward considering we have all kinds of different technology stacks? How do we meet the needs for Android and iOS users? And then we selected campusM, and we're able to single in on a stack, basically, that everybody was able to use.
Now, once you've actually rolled it into production, how come food zoo, how come dining option out of all these different services? How do you sort of prioritize what should go first to your students?
Well, I think at first we did a survey of students to see what they thought of what they wanted on there. And then we also have our campus analytics. The Food Zoo menu is one of the most visited websites that we're currently running. So it just made sense to translate that into our mobile app as well.
And in terms of the different stakeholders, who did you have to collaborate with? Did anyone else on campus needed their approval or was part of this project?
Well, I mean, pretty much since we already had an established web app for the Food Zoo menu, we just sort of went with the requirements we had built for our web page interface with that, and then just translated the app we had already built into a tile in campusM.
And in terms of, not sure if you had any, did you define initially any success criteria, or were there specific challenges that you knew you would be faced with?
Well, it's pretty much comes down to implementing the API we already had for our website. And we just wanted to make sure that we had the same base information on that we were publishing from our web page show up in the app as well. So,
and that's a nice segue, moving into the more sort of technical conversation. Maybe you can describe, you mentioned the API and web pages you had already in place. When did you design those? What kind of technologies do you have actually in the background?
Okay, so our web applications generally use like a JSON RESTful API to present to the clients. And we build out our backend using PHP and a MySQL database for our backend technology. And then since we had the challenge of integrating the menu publishing with our current content management system, I built the original online Food Zoo menu as a Angular JavaScript app that was published within our CMS. It's just a standalone module. And so that really translated well into taking some of those same techniques into the React-based campusM platform.
Now, as I think of it, so you've mentioned being able to pull the data using RESTful APIs in JSON, parsing them in a PHP. Who actually produces the data? What system are they actually using to put all the different data in?
All right, so we use a commercial product called Seaboard that is used for our dining management system. And we just are tasked with sort of reverse engineering their database and translating that into something that we can put a management layer on top of, so they have the ability to control what actually shows up on the web page and in the app, all from just one management console.
So if I understand correctly, Seaboard is installed locally, so you do have access to the database?
Correct, yeah. We have access to that applications database, so we were able to pull data from that system and then make a management layer where they can hide stuff and rename it and decide what's published, and then that gets put out to the API that our different apps will consume.
Nice. And then you have the dining people actually feeding in that information. Do you know, does it happen on a weekly basis, a monthly, a daily? Do you guys
they pretty much they set up their menus in advance for pretty much on a semester, and then the management interface, they pretty much can set their names for their items and which service lines show up in the menu system just once, and then it pretty much manages itself.
Yeah, I'd say an upside of this has been that they make last-minute changes in the menu, and they found that the application that our staff has developed really has been pivotal in making it so that their signage is updated. And there's a whole ecosystem of things that Eric has built to go around this, from the tile inside the campusM app, the online mobile web app, but there's also a digital signage component that shows up on big screen TVs that pulls from the same data.
Yeah.
So really, if I understand correctly, the fact that everything that ultimately comes from the sort of single source of truth, in a way, and that can be refreshed on a live feed, that's pretty big, in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really successful for our dining operations.
Yeah, we've definitely found the pattern of having like a vendor database where we're pulling out the core information, but as Eric was saying, a MySQL database where we're storing, like overrides. What information do we actually want to show up, so that they don't have to change their business practices and back in the kitchen just because the marketing person wants to see a little bit of different information up on the menu.
So sort of, you're not inflicting any kind of roles or any kind of policies you may have on them. They can do their business and you sort of take it from there. That's nice. Let me talk to you about the implementation process. So what was actually involved? How long was the overall implementation of it? What kind of support maybe you needed from us, from Libris during that point?
Well, we had our central web services really liaison with the campusM folks for us. And they were able to bring that the information back to us from their initial meetings for sort of what's the process of getting our environment set up, and then how do we control publishing to the platform, and then how do we get that platform then on our mobile devices to where we can sort of see our work as we push it up to the staging server. And then beyond getting sort of started and recognizing like the different tools that were available on the campusM platform, we really relied heavily on the example projects that were provided. Those were really great places for us to sort of, I think the one that had the example of ordering food from a restaurant was really great for sort of adapt the user interface framework that was provided as an example there as a great starting point for getting our application off the ground fairly quickly. Since we already had a solid API we had been using for a few years, it was pretty easy to then adapt that into something that could be displayed on the mobile apps. I'd say probably the implementation time it took us was maybe about 6 to 8 weeks until we had our first sort of draft functioning first iteration minimal shippable product we had out.
And I assume that was mostly also getting just familiar with the app extension kit technology, looking at the example project.
Right, correct.
So if I, just asking a question, if you had to do it again now, knowing how these technologies work, how long would you think it would take?
Well, we definitely were able to take a lot of what we learned making the FoodZoo menu app And then we went on to develop a open hours app for campus that showed when places were open. And that took us significantly less time for the campusM part. That was one where we were actually developing the back end in tandem with the campusM stuff that we hadn't developed before. So it probably took us about the same time. But if we had like just needed to consume an API and get it displayed in the web app, that's pretty easy for us to do now. And we were able to sort of share that knowledge with other departments on campus as well.
Yeah. And that takes me to a nice area where I think, as you mentioned, there are two elements here. One is actually how the backend system works, and then the other is once you have it working, how do you get it the information to display properly in campusM? Do you have any internal, not just internal, do you have any suggestions or recommendations for other campusM sites as they're about to embark on it? What would be like, a couple of tips or recommendations you would tell them?
I'd say what was really helpful is the Flux store libraries that are used to sort of maintain the internal state of the web app, sort of outside of React stuff. That way you can sort of keep the presentation and the data layers separate. And I know the sort of the Redux people have some really good documentation on their website that was sort of critical aha moment for how to simplify the internal state of our applications versus just sort of react at a glance. You can end up with some spaghetti code pretty quickly if you don't separate sort of your state from your display.
Yeah, the other thing we did relatively early on is a designer in our central IT office kind of took control over the look and feel of the app and built color schemes based on what the function of the app was, and we use some standard CSS classes. And so primarily that person's making all the decisions of how things look aside from the layout of a particular user interface. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to debate about that. We did run into some times where we had to look at different tiles and like, oh, we're all doing things a little bit differently here. How do we fix that? But keeping that coordinated is a good thing.
Now, when you do your development internally, I know we use at Libris, for example, an agile development methodology, storyboards, and things like that. Do you follow any specific methodology, or is it just based on getting this done at this timeline?
We pretty much do agile development, sort of using a Kanban board style. We sort of switch between, depending on how intense the development is on a project. We'll use Trello cards or Pivotal Tracker if it's a more complex project, in terms of just sort of identifying which features need to be developed and their priority on, along the lines of the time we have to spend on the project.
Yeah. On a similar note, the campus as a whole uses Trello as a tool to manage a Kanban board where we keep track of all of the phases of the campusM app. So every single tile that needs development gets a card on there, and maybe we'll split that out into a separate board or go into a more in-depth process for that. But it's easy for any of us on the development team to go and look and find out, what's rolling out this week, what's coming up in the next, what are the things that are just being kicked around as ideas. They even have a column where all the feedback that comes from the app's little feedback thing goes to a card, and we can just read through all the feedback that's been coming through.
Oh, that's very useful. So before we actually talk about that, and I do want to get your perspective on next, perhaps you can describe a little bit in terms of the deployment. You mentioned, Eric, you mentioned the staging environment and then into production. How does that process all get coordinated? Who gets to actually sign off and say, now let's move it into production?
No, that's a good question. We've been wrestling with that on campus a little bit. During the initial first phases, when we were still getting comfortable with the stack, our main central developer would publish them to the production app for us. But sort of as we became more comfortable with the platform and the process for deploying things, it sort of falls to me now to just go ahead and deploy the new versions of our tiles in the app.
Yeah, I'd say that's a real strength in campusM, is that we can have the flexibility to either lock it down or have distributed teams completely control the life cycle of their tiles.
And then once you've rolled it out into production, as it is now, if you go on your app, you can see that. What kind of support do you actually maintain for it? Is it something that requires any kind of a manual evaluation, or is it just release and forget?
Pretty much at this point, it's release and forget. We have a general life cycle where we check in with our apps and see if any improvements needed to be made on a regular basis. So it just sort of falls into the same way we maintain any web app for departments on campus.
And then you started talking about the response. Maybe you can share a little bit, whether it's on campusM, you said even within the Kanban board, or Trello, you maintain those comments. What has been the feedback so far?
Well, so some of the feedback we got, I remember when we first launched, the FoodZoo menu tile was singled out in the newspaper in a really positive way. Our campus decided we were going to have primarily the first release of the mobile app be for prospective students or transitioning to be the new students, so the people that matriculate onto campus. And so the current students were a little frustrated when they opened up the app and saw, oh, there's nothing for me in here, with the exception of what's in the cafeteria. And so they like that a lot. And continuously people are there saying, you know, once you're in the swing of things on campus, it's one of the leading reasons to open up the app, is to be able to look up, you know, what's for food today.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of services, so what's coming up next? You said there was like a, you know, option board and things you may want to do in the future. What do you have on the horizon for us?
That's really a great question. We've sort of it's really tough to sort of evaluate what would be the most useful on a front page of the application, and we're sort of really looking for a way that we could sort of maybe make subsections to where we could pull more departments' functions into the app. But we're really struggling as to the best way to organize it to keep it uncluttered for the main student use case for having the app on there. So we're still really exploring how we can best meet those needs.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of departments inside student affairs who would like presences inside the mobile application, but the problem is they don't really have anything that's a compelling use case to have in there where a student would want to do it. We've had departments ask us, oh, we want to have our website or even this application that's a web app, you know, integrated inside, but it's a not mobile friendly product that they've chosen. And so we've had to work with people to kind of say, maybe that's not the best use of your time, and let us help you evaluate some third-party products that will be able to integrate with this. I can say that as a whole campus, we're looking at adding a Getting Global section that will kind of streamline the process for everybody who's doing international studies, study abroad kind of things. We're also looking at having some add-ons for tutoring, and we're looking at doing some fiscal transparency so that everybody can see what the current financial state of the university is. That's probably more geared towards our faculty and staff than it is our students, but the students want to know that information too sometimes.
Sure. So I'll just finish with a couple questions. One question is, how can we best serve you as a vendor, as someone that you use several of our products? What more would you like to see Libris or campusM do in order to better serve your students and faculty, etc.?
I can say my #1 challenge in my job for any of our web applications is configuration management. So especially with trying to iterate on new versions of things, like having an easy way where I can point to different versions of our APIs would be wonderful. And besides that, like I was talking about earlier, like being able to have like subsections of tiles maybe in the app manager, where we could have categories that would then open up into other tiles for like subfolders. I think that would really help us be able to put more into the app and let people get more out of it without being too cluttered.
Yeah, having something that goes beyond just some of the existing predefined settings and just have a generic key value store that's available to us would be super useful. The other thing that we've been struggling with is analytics. And we've taken a quick peek at the beta business analytics or insight system from Oracle. We're really curious to see how that's going to move forward, because we can see what our most used tiles are, but we have no idea about the events inside of it. And we're really kind of asking the question of, are we going to need to build our own tracking platform to see, you know, what are people clicking into once they're inside a tile versus just are they using the tile?
Yeah. No, those are all great feedbacks. I think that, you know, two things I would say in that regard. One is always know that the ideas exchange is there for you to leverage, and we've started putting more emphasis. And the other one, then I agree with you about the analytics. The only caveat, obviously, is personal information, which we need to be very careful in terms of respecting that and complying with all terms. But definitely, that's an area of focus. We know we started with the rollout of Oracle Business Intelligence, and we'll sort of add on more functionality, because it's not just useful and interesting, but it's actually practical as you're trying to learn what different stakeholders are and the way they use your specific app. And I'll just add, you know, I'll finish with one question which I've asked before, but maybe from your perspective, any kind of advice you would give to fellow institutions, or anything you'd like to add on specifically about Foodzo or about campusM that you think would be interesting?
Well, I'd say that every campus should make their menu available to their students. It's hugely successful. It's always been a huge success for us when it was a web app, and it became a huge success when we added it to the mobile application. And it's a no-brainer for low-hanging fruit if you can interface with your food management system. The other thing I think, you know, just as a high-level benefit, campusM's model of allowing us to distribute development and have very concise and kind of sandbox parts of the application has enabled our university to work with our distributed IT model, where we have programmers that maybe are in a central office that handle needs for a certain portion of campus, but we have other people like Eric who are funded from a very distinct group of stakeholders, and that group of stakeholders expects to see him be able to produce content directly there. And so campusM has gotten us there in a way that the previous mobile projects that the university has had just didn't allow us to do.
Yeah, and in terms of advice for any developers, just getting the platform up and running, and just have fun playing with the examples. And I was definitely surprised at how friendly React was, and I'll probably be using some of the techniques I learned developing in campusM that'll make the rest of my web apps better. So it was a really pleasant surprise. I was a little worried about the web app app development for phones, since I'm primarily a web app developer, but it turns out my skill set just worked wonderfully with what was available in campusM.
Yeah. One other thing I'd probably add is our university's got a big focus towards making all the software we have accessible, and having a web-based platform inside a native app made that very easy. We were able to translate all the information we knew about the WCAG standards and ARIA roles and bring that straight into the app. We didn't have to understand accessibility for compiled languages with iOS or Android or anything like that. We just translated the knowledge straight there.
Wonderful. Well, thanks. I think, you know, Eric, I definitely identify with your comment about adding more skills into personal. I was trying to do a few poking and developing small things in the AK myself, and I think it's quite refreshing. So with that, I'd like to thank both of you, Eric, Dan. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope to continue and stay in touch and have this fruitful partnership continue to provide more services. Thank you.
Thank you.